My name is Tiara Sharma, and I am your host and producer of Restore Hearts TV. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is episode 2, and we are going to start today off by talking about grief. Yes, grief is our topic for today. And so, with the recent things that have gone on as a result of COVID 19, every single one of us has experienced loss in some way, whether it's loss of a loved one, whether it's loss of a job, whether it's loss of income, loss of relationships, friendships, loss of life as you know it. This is considered a loss, and it is something, a process that we need to grieve. And so, if you're like me, I always thought that grief was just the loss of a person through death. That's the only way that I thought that a person could be experiencing grief, as if you lost a loved one. But I've learned in my adulthood that this is not true. And so I do not assume that you know this also. And so that's the reason I think it's important for us to talk about this topic, important for us to share and know the differences between grief, the differences between depression. And so this episode is going to be more informational, more educational, for us to be able to talk about some of those differences. And so, like last time, I have prepared a PowerPoint because I am what? A visual learner. And so I love visuals to go along with the conversation. And so give me just a moment so I can share my screen and we can get started. What is grief? And if you're like me, I love definitions. I love to just get a basic definition of what we are talking about. So if you are one of those people, you can look up grief. There's going to be so many different definitions that you find, but there are 3 that I found were very just straightforward, and I think they're very basic and very easy to understand. And so, one definition of grief is deep sorrow, especially that caused by someone's death. And remember, we talked about that. For me, I believed that that was the only way that a person could be experiencing grief. It was through loss of a loved one. And so, that's one that we most commonly think about when we think of grief. Another definition of grief is the emotional suffering you feel when something or someone you love is taken away. So I thought that this was a good one to focus on, because remember when we talked about emotions last week, we found out that emotions they manifest in the subconscious. And that means that we're not always aware of our emotions, of those feelings, because they're underneath the surface. They're feelings that are very deep, and they are feelings that we have to be intentional about uncovering so that we bring them into our conscious mind and that we're able to deal with them. And so grief is emotional suffering, which means this is suffering in the subconscious that you feel when something or someone you love is taken away. And then the third definition of grief that I thought was appropriate for our discussion is an intense emotional experience triggered by loss. So again, grief and emotions. I want you to pick up on that, because remember, emotions are manifested in the subconscious, which means we are not aware of them. So grief, when we think about grief, it's very possible for you to be grieving and not even know about it. So that's why I want you to really think about that. Let that settle in. So there are 5 stages of grief. And if you look this up, there's so much information there. And I don't want to just overwhelm you with information. I just want to give you a basic foundational understanding of what each one is. And so during these 5 stages of grief, you will go through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And so denial helps us to survive the loss. And so we go numb during denial because we don't want to be overwhelmed by those emotions and those feelings that come with the grief. And so anger, anger, the most important thing that I saw about anger is that we need to be willing to feel anger, because when we suppress it, it makes things worse for a lot of us. It is easier to suppress it than to feel it. So that's me. It was easier for me to suppress anger than to feel it. I did not want to be known as the angry Black woman. Like, we all know what kind of negative connotation comes with that title. And so I didn't want to be the angry Black woman. And because I didn't want to be angry, I often didn't even realize when I was angry. And that turned into sadness. And so I want you to be aware of that. Bargaining. Bargaining is when we try to basically negotiate what happens or what's happening. We want life to return back to the way it was before. And we will do anything not to feel that pain that comes with the loss. And so as a result, that's when your conditional statements start coming in. If I just stop eating, those donuts that I know I'm not supposed to be eating, will you heal my grandmother? Just, whatever it is, you fill in the blank, but it's that negotiating, that trying to, if I do this, then can I get a different result? I'll do anything not to feel this. And so with depression is feelings of sadness, emptiness, or hopelessness. Feelings of guilt are not grief related. And then that last one is acceptance. Acceptance. In this phase, you have accepted what has happened, and you are looking for ways to move forward in your life. And so down there, you can see that I have some asterisks around that last sentence, because it was very important when I was reading that we accept how the loss has changed us. When we grieve, when we have these losses in life, we're not the same after we experience these losses. And so we need to take time to acknowledge that, hey, I'm different now. This loss has affected me in such a way that maybe if you lost, let's say you lost a loved one, you've been married for 30 years and your spouse passes away, and maybe your home is not the same anymore. Maybe you feel like the loss of your loved one has changed you in such a way that you don't believe you can spend the rest of your life in the house with those memories. So it's not that you don't love your loved one, it's that now that you realize that in order for you to move forward, for you to have that acceptance, for you to move forward in your life, you can't spend the rest of your life in that house that you spent with your spouse for 30 years. So that's one example. All right, let's move forward. So remember, I talked about grief and depression. They can look very, very similar. And so I wanted to show you this graph. I thought it was an excellent graph on Very Well. There was a website called Very Well that talks about a lot of different mental health topics. And so I thought this was an excellent graphic of the similarities and the differences between grief and depression. The main thing that I find to be the separation when we're talking about grief versus depression is that grief is related specifically to a loss, a specific loss. Like I lost my grandparent and I feel sad about that. This is specifically related to the loss of a grandparent. When it comes to depression, you feel guilt and it's not related to grief. It has nothing to do with that loss. Depression is more about who you believe you are. Those negative thoughts, those negative feelings of unworthiness that are attached to how you're looking and seeing things. And with grief, you feel the loss of what happened. You're feeling a loss because your grandparents are no longer with you. With depression, depression says that I'm the reason. I'm the reason why this is happening. And so those are two very different thought processes, two very different things to be aware of. All right. So I want to take this opportunity to say, let's stay connected. So I want to invite you to join my Facebook community, Restore Hearts TV community page. And on this page, it's a way for us to stay connected week to week. That way that we can talk about some of these different topics that we're talking about from week to week. We can just keep the conversation going. This is only a 30-minute broadcast. And so there's so much to unpack. There's so much more that can be said about these topics. And so I'm inviting you to continue the conversation in my Facebook community group, Restore Hearts TV community page. And so go join now. All right, let's keep it going. So I think we talked about this, but it's something that is noteworthy, that we must understand emotions. Emotions manifest from the subconscious. I probably sound like a broken record now, but this is like something that we need to continue to understand, something that we continue to repeat. It's not something that you can, it's something that you can repeat every single time to get it into your into your conscious mind, to your thinking mind. We want to be conscious of this, that the emotions manifest in our subconscious. That means that this is part of the mind where we are not fully aware, and it influences what we do and how we feel. So even though we're not aware of it, it is a very essential part to how we move, how we behave, and then how we feel throughout the day. And so grief is an intense emotional experience triggered by loss. And so when you have a loss, we talked about that when you have these losses and when you don't acknowledge them, or you may not even know, like I said, you may not even know before this day, that you need to grieve some of the losses that you've had in your life, because you just thought that grief was the loss of a loved one. But it's possible that maybe you haven't lost someone that close to you, but maybe you've lost a job, a significant job. Maybe you've lost a relationship. Maybe you've lost a pet that was very near and dear to you. So this is something you have to think about. And so I just want to reiterate that you should grieve anything that feels like a loss to you. Anything. It doesn't matter how big, how small, how insignificant it may feel to someone else. If it felt like a loss to you, you need to go through the grieving process. And so some of the things I think we've already talked about, but we'll go through them again. Loss of a loved one by death or by separation. So separation could be a divorce. It could be distance. Like maybe you had to move to a new state for a new job, and now you've had to leave some friends behind to start your new life. That is a loss, a separation. Sickness, and I say sickness kind of goes with that loss of health, because maybe you were healthy, maybe you ran a 5K every year. Let's say you were so healthy that you could run a 5K every year, but now your health something has happened in your health, in your body. And so now maybe you can only walk. Thank God you can walk, but that's not how you remember. You remember that you used to be able to run a 5K. And that is a loss. And that is a loss that could deeply affect you if that was important to you. And so loss of health or sickness, that's a loss. That's something you may need to grieve. Ending a toxic relationship. So I know that a lot of times I think that we could be very judgmental of maybe men or women who have to leave a toxic relationship. But to that person, the person who is being abusive, the person who is toxic and not holding up to their end of the commitment, they love that person. And so even though it's healthy to separate, it still feels like a loss. And so you will feel the loss, even though it's good for you. it's still a loss. And so you will need to grieve that process. Loss of finances. Finances, if you lose a job, maybe you go from making 100K a year to 50K a year. That's a huge loss. Like that's a huge difference in income. It will tremendously change the way that you live, the way that you move, the way that you spend your resources, the way that you invest. And so that could feel like a loss, even though you have the ability. There's always an ability to recover. But for that specific moment, that circumstance, it feels like a loss. And so that's a process. We need to go through that process so you can get those emotions, clear those emotions out of your heart. Remember, we talked about the heart, how the heart is that center for it. The heart has a mind of its own. And so there are more emotions, more feelings that signal from the heart to the brain. And so what is going on in your heart matters. We need to bring those emotions to the surface so that we can get them out, and then we can make room for the new positive things to come in. And we talked about the loss of life as we knew it pre-COVID. I'm a registered nurse, so when COVID started and we needed to wear masks, it really didn't faze me. But for someone who may not be in the medical field, you go every day from not having to wear a mask, and now you have to wear a mask everywhere you go. I mean, it may be that could be definitely overwhelming and feel like a loss. And so, like I said, these things may seem insignificant to other people, but if it felt like a loss to you, it is something that you need to pay attention to. It is something that you need to grieve. All right, so I have some reflections for you. So these are just questions if you have a journal, you can take out your journal, take out your notebook. And these are some questions I want you to think about during the week. Think about them, and just whatever comes to your mind, write it down, because we don't want to hold on to these things that are preventing us from moving forward. And so the first reflection is, are there any losses that I have experienced in my life that I have not taken time to grieve about? That's very important, because just because you're in a new phase of life, if there's something that happened 20 years ago that you never took the time to grieve about, it's holding you up. It's holding you back from moving forward in your life, and it needs to be addressed. No matter how big or small. I keep saying that because comparison can hinder your progress. If you're looking at someone else's situation and you're thinking that just because it's not as big as someone else's situation, it's not a reason for you to grieve. Remember, this is about you and the processes you need to go through. To you, that may be very significant, and it can hinder your growth and process and your progress if you do not address it. So this is not a time for comparison. It is a time to just reflect, and then whatever comes up, it comes up for a reason. Do not try to make it seem less than what it is. Just go with it and take some quiet time to explore it. So faith, that this is a faith-based TV show. This is a faith-based network. So I don't want to leave you without some faith. So Psalms 147, verse 3 in the Amplified, it says, "He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds, healing their pain and comforting their sorrow." And, as I was reading that, I said, well, what does it really mean to bind up their wounds? And so I looked it up. And so it means to heal one's physical or inner pain and sorrow. And so this is what God does for us. He heals our broken hearts, and he binds up, he heals those inner pains and sorrow that we go through. So what is the remedy for grief? Joy. Joy. So when we look up joy is the emotion of great happiness. It is the feeling of happiness or joy. So I don't know if you caught that. Let me break it down. Joy covers both our feelings, which we perceive, they are in our consciousness. We are aware of them. And joy also gives us happiness, great happiness as far as our emotions. Remember that our emotions are the things that we are not aware of. They are not in our conscious. So joy helps us to basically, I won't say cover, but it's our remedy, it's our counter for those emotions that have not yet come to the surface yet, because they do need to come to the surface so that we can process through them and bring them into our conscious awareness. But until we get to that point, we have joy, and joy will help us during our times of grieving. And so Nehemiah 8:10 says, "And do not be worried, for the joy of the Lord is your strength and your stronghold." Amen. So I wanted to give you those verses to go back in your quiet time, in your downtime, when you're feeling those emotions of grief. Come on. I don't know if you've ever heard the term wave of grief. Though they're waves of intense emotions that you feel. So you'll have something God inspired, God filled words to anchor you during those times of grief. And so I have some affirmations for grief that I want you to say with me. So the first one, it is safe for me to feel emotion. For some of us, me included, it was me. I did not know that it was safe to feel emotions. So I had to tell myself, this is something that I had to repeat to myself. Tiara, you put your name in there. Put your name in there. It is safe for me to feel emotion. The next one, I give myself permission to feel emotions. So me giving myself permission, because if you didn't think it was safe to feel emotions, then you may not know that, okay, now it's time to feel. You have to have that activation that, hey, I give myself permission. This is something that I can do. I give myself permission to feel emotions. So next, I give myself permission to grieve the losses I have experienced in my life. Give yourself permission to grieve the losses you have experienced in your life, because for some of you, every time that you talked about a loss, every time that you tried to bring it up, there may have been someone else who, because they did not grieve their losses, they made you feel like your losses were insignificant. And so you learned, most of us will that's something we learned during childhood, that some things in life, you as the saying goes, you take a licking and you keep on ticking. Well, I'm here to destroy that lie. That's a lie. You have to give yourself permission to feel the losses that you've experienced in your life. Because remember, we said that if we don't, they will hinder our progress and they will hinder our growth. And so we need to process through them so that we can move forward. Next, I choose to release my emotions to God through prayer so that I can receive his joy. Remember what we said about joy? Joy covers covers our feelings and our emotions. So those things that we are aware of and those things that we are not aware of. And so this is a choice that we're going to give those emotions to God so that we can receive his joy. And the last affirmation is, I am joy. I am joy. Not that you just feel it. Hey, listen, I'm going to become joy so that I can also, while I'm healing, while I'm growing, while I'm learning, while I'm progressing, I can also be joy to someone else who may be grieving and who may not have the knowledge that we have about joy. All right. And so before we go, I just wanted to say a quick prayer for grief. And this is a prayer that you can say for yourself, for your loved ones, anyone who comes to mind that you know who may be grieving this is a short prayer, a powerful prayer that you can say. And so, Father, I am sorry for making grief bigger than you. I choose to release every worry, emotion, and concern to you. I receive your joy that is my strength to carry me through difficult times. I thank you for the power and authority I have through Jesus to live free and in peace. The emotions I experience through grief will not overtake me because I remain in your presence. Amen. All right. And so this is an opportunity I want to take to tell you about my book. I am a co-author of a book called Good Grief. And it's 14 inspiring stories of finding the goodness in grief. And as you can see, we are Amazon best-selling book. We are number 23 in grief and bereavement, 24 in death and grief, and number 84 in counseling and psychology. And so I believe that this is a book that will help be a great tool, be a great resource for you during your time of grief. Remember, I told you that it is so important that we share our stories. When we have overcome something, when we have found light in darkness, it is so important that we share with others, because there are some people who are hopeless. They don't know, they don't think that they have a choice. They don't think that it gets better. And so when we share our stories, we help to empower, we help to give others the opportunity to see that there are better days ahead. And so I am inviting you to order your copies of Good Grief. And I have my email address provided there, tiara@mothersmentalhealthmovement.com. If you want to order copies for yourself, for your ministries, for your women's group, for your children's group, we have 4 young authors between the ages of 10 and 22 who share their stories on grief. Because sometimes we don't understand what grief looks like in our children. And so it's very important that we understand how our children grieving, how that looks. And so that's what we'll actually be talking about next week, is grief and our children. And so I want to give you this opportunity to follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Clubhouse. We want to continue the conversation. Please join my Facebook group, Restore Hearts TV community page, and let's continue the conversation. Let's keep talking. All right, you guys, I love you. I will see you next week for our episode on grief and our children. And have a great day. I will see you next week.
Thank you for watching this episode of Restore Hearts TV.
Life is a journey, and there are many moments. Some moments are smooth. You flow through them effortlessly. There are other moments when life's challenges interrupt your momentum, yet you find the strength to get back on track, to keep moving. So even if you have to crawl to make it there, do it, because victory belongs to you. You are equipped to handle every part of the journey. You were created to overcome this. Don't give up. I love you.